On December 21, 1980, one of America's wealthiest women was found unconscious on the marble bathroom floor of one of Newport's grandest mansions. Around her were rooms filled with priceless antiques, servants, and a fortune capable of providing the finest medical care money could buy. None of it could wake her. Her name was Martha Sunny von Bülow. She was 48 years old, still breathing, but completely unresponsive. Doctors kept her alive, yet the damage to her brain was catastrophic. Sunny would remain in that condition for almost 28 years. She would never explain how she reached that bathroom floor. She would never testify at the sensational trials that followed. She would never tell her 3 children whether the man sleeping beside her that night had tried to murder her, or whether the truth was entirely different. Her husband, Claus von Bülow, would be convicted of attempting to kill her. That conviction would be overturned, and at a second trial, he would be found not guilty. But the changing verdicts did not reunite Sunny's family or provide a final answer. They only deepened the question that followed her name for decades. How did a woman protected by extraordinary wealth become completely helpless? Today, we uncover the disturbing story of Sunny von Bülow, the heiress whose fortune could buy almost everything except the truth about her final conscious night. On December 19th, less than a week before Christmas, Sunny traveled from New York to Clarendon Court with Claus and their daughter, Coma. Sunny's son Alexander, known as Alex, was also staying at the house. Clarendon Court was not an ordinary family residence. The enormous mansion stood beside the Atlantic Ocean and represented everything the von Bülows appeared to possess: wealth, elegance, privacy, and security. But behind its doors, their marriage was already under strain. On the evening of December 20th, the family visited a local cinema. After returning home, Alex spent time talking privately with his mother. Sunny briefly entered her bathroom, returned to the library, and asked Claus to bring her some soup. As their conversation continued, Alex noticed something frightening. His mother was becoming weak and uncoordinated. He had seen those symptoms once before, and he understood how serious they could become. When Sunny struggled to stand, Alex carried her to her bedroom and told Claus that she was unwell. A few minutes later, Sunny emerged from the bathroom and moved toward her bed. Alex helped her lie down. Claus entered the bedroom. Alex left his mother alone with him. The following morning, Alex woke at approximately 11 o'clock. Looking from his window, he saw Claus walking back toward the mansion from the direction of the ocean. When Alex later asked whether his mother had awakened, Claus appeared surprised and went toward her room. Around 10 or 15 minutes passed before Claus returned and silently motioned for Alex to follow him. Alex entered his mother's bedroom and stepped into the bathroom. Sunny was lying unconscious on the floor. Claus placed a finger beneath her nose and determined that she was still breathing. Emergency assistance was called, and paramedics rushed her to Newport Hospital. The following day, she was transferred to Boston and later moved to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York. She never regained consciousness. At first, the incident appeared to be a devastating medical emergency. But almost exactly 1 year earlier, during another Christmas visit to Clarendon Court, Sunny had suffered a remarkably similar collapse. That time, she had nearly died before unexpectedly recovering. Now her older children began examining everything around their mother differently. Her deteriorating marriage, Claus's relationship with another woman, the millions he might receive if Sunny died, and a mysterious black bag that a trusted employee claimed to have seen among his belongings. Those suspicions would turn a family tragedy into one of the most sensational criminal cases of the 20th century. But before newspapers reduced her to a fortune, a coma, and a courtroom mystery, Sunny had been a cheerful little girl, born into a world of almost unimaginable privilege. And the first great tragedy of her life arrived long before she ever met Claus von Bülow. Long before Sunny von Bülow became associated with a courtroom mystery, her life had already been shaped by money, loss, and the expectations placed upon an only child. Sunny was born Martha Sharp Crawford on the first day of September. According to accounts repeated throughout her life, her birth occurred aboard her father's private railway carriage while the family was traveling through Virginia. The unusual beginning earned her the childhood nickname Choo Choo. Later, people began calling her Sunny because of her warm, cheerful personality. It was the name that stayed with her for the rest of her life. Her father, George Crawford, was a powerful utilities businessman associated with Columbia Gas and Electric and Lone Star Gas. Her mother, Annie Laurie Warmack, also came from considerable wealth. On the surface, Martha had been born into almost unimaginable security. But George Crawford died while his daughter was still a very young child. Sunny was his only child, and the fortune connected to his estate was widely reported to be worth as much as $100 million. Even allowing for the different estimates published over the years, there was no question that she had become one of the richest young heiresses in America. The money could provide houses, servants, private education, and complete financial protection. It could not replace the father she barely had time to know. Sunny was raised by her mother in Pittsburgh and New York City and educated in exclusive schools. Her childhood took place behind the carefully controlled doors of American high society, where appearances, family names, and suitable marriages carried enormous importance. She grew into a tall, blonde, and elegant young woman and entered society as a debutante in the early 1950s. But those who remembered her later spoke about more than her money or appearance. Her children described a devoted and caring mother with excellent taste, a love of decorating her homes, and a deep affection for her dogs. She even carried a private childhood dream of becoming an astronaut, a surprising ambition for a young woman expected to follow the traditional path of an heiress. That traditional path soon led her toward Europe. While traveling with her mother, Sunny met Prince Alfred von Auersperg, usually called Alfie. He belonged to an old Austrian princely family, but the collapse of the Austrian Empire had greatly reduced the family's position and wealth. When Sunny encountered him at a European resort, he was reportedly working as a tennis instructor. For Sunny, Alfie offered something American money could not provide: a royal title and entry into European aristocracy. For Alfie, Sunny brought the financial power of one of America's great fortunes. They married on July 20th, 1957. Sunny became Princess von Auersperg, and for a time, her life appeared to resemble the future society had prepared for her. The couple lived in Europe and welcomed 2 children. Their daughter, Annie Laurie, known as Ala, was born in 1958. Their son, Alexander, followed in 1959. Sunny loved her children, but the marriage did not provide the stability she had expected. Later accounts described Alfie as unfaithful and the relationship as increasingly unhappy. Sunny also grew tired of living in Austria and wanted to raise Ala and Alexander in the United States. In 1965, after 8 years of marriage, Sunny and Alfie divorced. Reports claimed that she provided him with a substantial financial settlement, including money and property. Sunny returned to New York with her children, still extraordinarily wealthy, but no longer protected by the title and marriage that were supposed to complete her life. Her first attempt at aristocratic happiness had ended in disappointment. But Sunny was still young, beautiful, and surrounded by privilege. Before long, another European gentleman entered her world. He was intelligent, polished, and familiar with the habits of extremely wealthy people. He had worked for oil billionaire J. Paul Getty and presented himself as a man perfectly suited to Sunny's society. His name was Claus von Bülow, and the second marriage would change the lives of Sunny and all 3 of her children forever. Claus von Bülow understood how wealthy people lived because he had spent years observing one of the richest men in the world. Born Claus Cecil Borberg in Copenhagen, he studied law at Trinity College, Cambridge, practiced briefly in London, and later became an assistant to oil billionaire J. Paul Getty. The position brought him into a world where enormous fortunes, private estates, and aristocratic connections were treated as ordinary parts of life. Claus was intelligent, socially confident, and known for his dark sense of humor. He also understood the manners expected in elite European circles. To Sunny, recently divorced and rebuilding her life in New York, he appeared sophisticated and reassuring. They had reportedly grown close while Sunny was still living, apart from her first husband. Claus later said that although they were geographically separated, they had been emotionally together for 2 years before their wedding. On June 6, 1966, 13 months after Sunny's divorce, they married at the Brick Presbyterian Church in Manhattan. Their daughter, Cosima, was born the following year. Claus became stepfather to Alla and Alexander, and for many years, the 5 of them appeared to be a stable family. Sunny's fortune supported an extraordinary life. They occupied a 14-room apartment on Fifth Avenue, overlooking Central Park, and spent time at Clarendon Court, their vast Newport mansion facing the Atlantic. The rooms were filled with expensive antiques and museum-quality furniture. They traveled, entertained, and moved among people whose names appeared regularly in society columns. For a time, Sunny seemed to have found what her first marriage had failed to provide. Even Alla and Alexander later acknowledged that their mother and Claus had once been happy, and that they had felt affection for their stepfather. But by the late 1970s, the marriage had begun to deteriorate. Accounts of Sunny's condition during this period would later become bitterly disputed. Some witnesses described her as lonely and increasingly dependent on alcohol and prescription medication. Her children and friends believed that this picture was exaggerated to damage her reputation. What is certain is that Sunny and Claus were discussing divorce, and Claus had begun a relationship with another woman. Her name was Alexandra Isles, a wealthy, socially connected actress. She met Claus in 1978, and by the following year, their relationship had become intimate. They discussed marriage, and Alexandra reportedly gave him a deadline to end his marriage to Sunny. But divorce carried an uncomfortable financial reality. Claus enjoyed a lifestyle largely supported by his wife's fortune. If Sunny divorced him, that security could disappear. If she died while they were still married, her will reportedly entitled him to millions of dollars, the Fifth Avenue apartment, and Clarendon Court. Prosecutors would later present that difference as a possible motive. At the time, however, it remained hidden behind the closed doors of their marriage. Then came Christmas 1979. On the evening of December 26, Sunny became weak and uncoordinated at Clarendon Court. Alexander helped his mother to her bedroom. The following morning, her longtime maid, Maria Schrahlhammer, heard Sunny moaning and discovered that she could not be awakened. Maria later testified that she urged Claus to summon a doctor. According to the court record, he did not immediately do so. A call was placed that afternoon, but several more hours passed before the doctor arrived. By then, Sunny's condition had become critical. She vomited, began gasping for breath, and suffered cardiac arrest. The doctor managed to resuscitate her, and she was rushed to Newport Hospital. Tests revealed dangerously low blood sugar, but doctors could not determine exactly what had caused it. She was diagnosed with hypoglycemia of unknown origin, along with complications from inhaling material into her lungs. Against expectations, Sunny recovered. She regained consciousness and returned home in early January 1980. No one accused Claus of attacking her, and the incident was treated as a frightening medical emergency. But only weeks later, Maria entered a walk-in closet connected to Claus's bedroom in New York. Inside a traveling case, she noticed a smaller black bag. She opened it, and what she claimed to have found would later become the most important evidence in the case against Claus von Bülow. The black bag did not immediately appear dangerous. When Maria Schrahlhammer first discovered it inside Claus's traveling case in February 1980, she found several small containers holding pills, powder, and liquid. Something about them disturbed her enough to return later and copy information from the labels, but she did not yet accuse Claus of anything, and Sunny had already recovered from her first coma. Months passed. Around Thanksgiving, Maria claimed that she saw the bag again inside Claus's bedroom. This time its contents had changed. Alongside the containers were several needles, a syringe and a small bottle labeled insulin. Maria called Alexander into the room and showed him what she had found. This was troubling because Sunny was not diabetic. She had, however, suffered a mysterious coma connected to dangerously low blood sugar. Insulin lowers blood sugar. If someone received far more than the body needed, the result could be unconsciousness, brain damage, or death. Still, a suspicious bag was not proof of an attack. On December 19th, Maria saw the bag again as the family prepared to travel from New York to Clarendon Court. According to her later testimony, she placed the larger canvas bag containing it with the luggage being taken to the family car. 2 days later, Sunny was found unconscious on her bathroom floor. After she was transferred to a Boston hospital, Alexander began searching Clarendon Court for the bag. He checked Claus's closet but could not find it. When he returned several days later, the closet that had previously been accessible was locked. For Alex, the missing bag and locked door transformed suspicion into fear. He discussed everything with Ala, their grandmother, Annie Laurie Aitken, and Maria. They wondered whether Sunny's 2 comas had been caused deliberately. The family hired Richard Koo, a former Manhattan district attorney, to investigate. Koo arranged for a private investigator to accompany Alexander back to Clarendon Court. On January 23, 1981, they entered Claus's study and searched the locked closet. Inside a metal box, they found a small black bag. The contents included pills, ampules, a syringe, and hypodermic needles. There were also containers holding substances later identified as prescription drugs. One unsealed needle was sent for laboratory testing, and a washing taken from it reportedly tested positive for insulin, as well as traces of other drugs. To Sunny's children, this appeared to confirm their worst suspicion. But the way the evidence had been obtained would later create serious legal problems. The search had been conducted by private individuals without Claus's permission. Items had been removed, transported to New York, examined, sampled, and stored, before eventually being delivered to Rhode Island police. That complicated journey would later raise questions about privacy, testing, and the reliability of the evidence. For now, however, investigators saw the black bag as the missing connection between Sunny's unexplained blood sugar crises and the man who had been alone with her. The case against Claus was entirely circumstantial. No one had seen him inject Sunny. No witness could say what had happened in either bedroom. The prosecution would need to construct its case from medical evidence, Maria's testimony, Claus's affair, his possible financial benefit, and his behavior during both emergencies. In July 1981, a Newport County grand jury indicted Claus von Bülow on 2 counts of assault with intent to murder, one for each of Sunny's comas. Claus denied harming his wife. He maintained that Sunny's collapses were caused by her health, alcohol, and medication. His daughter Cosima believed him. Ala and Alexander did not. The family that had once lived together inside Clarendon Court was now divided into opposing sides of a criminal case. And while Sunny lay unconscious in a hospital bed, unable to defend her reputation or accuse anyone, the world began arguing over what kind of woman she had been. Was she a vulnerable heiress targeted for her fortune? Or was she a deeply troubled woman whose private habits had produced a medical disaster? In February 1982, 12 jurors entered a Newport courtroom to decide which version they believed. By the time they returned with a verdict, Claus von Bülow would be facing 30 years in prison. The most important person in the courtroom could neither appear nor speak. As Claus von Bülow's first trial began in Newport in 1982, Sunny remained in a New York hospital, completely unaware that strangers were examining the most private parts of her marriage, health, and personal habits. The case quickly became an international sensation. It contained everything the public found irresistible: an heiress, an aristocratic husband, a secret mistress, and an alleged crime committed inside a mansion. The prosecution argued that the separate clues formed one clear story. Claus wanted to leave his marriage without losing the luxurious life Sunny's money provided. Insulin, they claimed, gave him a method that might make her death resemble a natural medical crisis. Alexandra Isles delivered some of the most damaging testimony. She described her relationship with Claus and claimed that after Sunny's first collapse, he told her he had watched his unconscious wife for hours before finally calling a doctor. The defense attacked Alexandra's reliability and stressed that no one had witnessed an injection. It also argued that Sunny's medical problems could have resulted from alcohol and prescription medication. But during the first trial, the prosecution's medical evidence proved more persuasive. After 6 weeks of testimony and 6 days of deliberation, the jury reached its decision on March 16, 1982. Guilty on both counts. Claus was later sentenced to 10 years for the first alleged attempt and 20 years for the second, to be served consecutively. The elegant society figure who had once moved comfortably through Fifth Avenue drawing rooms was now facing 30 years in prison. But the verdict was only the beginning of the legal battle. Claus hired Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz to assist with his appeal. Instead of trying to prove exactly what caused Sunny's comas, the appeal focused on whether the first trial had been conducted fairly. In 1984, the Rhode Island Supreme Court identified 2 major problems. First, the defense had been denied access to investigative material gathered by Richard Koo, even though Sunny's family had shared parts of that investigation with authorities and could no longer protect everything as confidential. Second, state officials had chemically tested items from the black bag without obtaining a search warrant. The police analysis went further than the earlier private testing, violating Claus's constitutional protection against unreasonable searches. The court therefore vacated both convictions and ordered a new trial. This did not declare Claus innocent. It meant that the evidence had to be reconsidered under proper legal rules. The second trial began in Providence in 1985, and this time the defense was far better prepared. Led in court by former federal prosecutor Thomas Puccio, Claus's team called a group of prominent medical specialists who challenged the insulin theory. They argued that Sunny's crises could have been caused by a combination of medication, alcohol, reactive hypoglycemia, and other health conditions. One expert testified that insulin had been detected on the outside of the needle rather than inside it. According to the defense, if the needle had passed through human skin, much of that material should have been wiped away. This raised the possibility that the needle had been contaminated without ever being used on Sunny. The defense also emphasized weaknesses in the original medical testing, including an important insulin result that had not been repeated. Instead of presenting one certain cause, it offered the jury several reasonable alternatives. Alexandra Isles returned and repeated her damaging account. Claus did not testify. His lawyers admitted that he had been an unfaithful husband, but insisted that adultery was not evidence of attempted murder. On June 10, 1985, after weeks of testimony, the second jury delivered its verdict: not guilty on both counts. Claus walked out of court, legally cleared. Sunny remained exactly where she had been throughout both trials, silent, unconscious, and unable to tell anyone whether either jury had reached the truth. For Alla and Alexander, the acquittal was not the end. It was the moment they decided that if the criminal courts could not hold their stepfather responsible, they would pursue him themselves. And their next battle would divide Sunny's family even more deeply. Claus von Bülow's acquittal ended the criminal case, but it did not end the war inside Sunny's family. Alla and Alexander remained convinced that their stepfather had caused their mother's condition. Cosima supported her father. The disagreement became so bitter that Sunny's mother, Annie Laurie Aitken, removed Cosima from her will. When Aitken died in 1984, Cosima lost an enormous inheritance. Only weeks after the second trial, Alla and Alexander filed a civil lawsuit against Claus on Sunny's behalf. They demanded $56 million in damages and prepared to enter a court where the standard of proof was lower. But there would be no third verdict. In December 1987, the two sides reached a private settlement. Claus agreed to divorce Sunny, surrender any claim to her fortune, and give up authority over her medical care. He later returned to Europe. In exchange, the civil action was dropped, and Cosima regained her share of her grandmother's estate, reportedly receiving approximately $30 million. The agreement was not an admission of guilt. Legally, Claus remained acquitted, but after more than 20 years of marriage, he and Sunny were finally divorced in 1988, without Sunny ever knowing that the marriage had ended. Claus eventually settled in London and returned to society life. The case remained attached to his name, particularly after Alan Dershowitz's book inspired the 1990 film Reversal of Fortune. Jeremy Irons won an Academy Award for portraying Claus, while Glenn Close played Sunny. The film turned the scandal into entertainment. The real Sunny remained in a hospital room. For years, Alla and Alexander visited her regularly. They brought familiar objects from her former life so that the room would not feel completely clinical. Paintings from her Fifth Avenue apartment were placed on the walls. She slept on fine Portho sheets. Her hair was washed and styled. Her nails were maintained, and flowers were kept near her bed. Her children spoke to her, touched her, and introduced her to grandchildren she could not acknowledge. There was no reliable indication that Sunny understood them, but they continued treating her as the mother they remembered, rather than simply the patient the world had read about. In a cruel coincidence, Sunny's first husband, Prince Alfred von Auersperg, was also left in an irreversible coma after a car accident in 1983. He remained in that condition for approximately 9 years before his death. Alla and Alexander therefore watched both of their parents disappear into prolonged unconsciousness. They responded by turning part of their grief into public work. They established an organization in Sunny's name that developed into the National Center for Victims of Crime. They also supported a foundation dedicated to coma and head trauma research. Sunny outlived her mother, her first husband, and many people who had testified about her life. On December 6, 2008, nearly 28 years after she was found at Clarendon Court, Sunny died at the Mary Manning Walsh Nursing Home in New York. The immediate cause was cardiopulmonary arrest. Her 3 children later gathered for a memorial service at Brick Presbyterian Church, the same church where Sunny had married Claus more than 40 years earlier. There were hymns, readings, and memories of Sunny as a mother. According to those present, no one mentioned the trials or the event that had divided the family. Sunny was buried in Rhode Island. Her gravestone did not preserve either of the European names that had made her famous. It carried the name with which her life had begun, Martha Sharp Crawford. Claus von Bülow died in London in 2019. He had been legally acquitted and never faced another trial. No one else was ever charged, and no final medical explanation ended the dispute. Perhaps that is why Sunny's story remains so unsettling. 2 juries examined the same marriage and reached opposite conclusions. Lawyers, doctors, and relatives argued for decades, but the only person who knew what she experienced that night could never speak. Sunny possessed houses, titles, and a fortune estimated in the tens of millions. Yet in the end, the one thing denied to her was control over her own story. Thank you for watching Fame Forgotten. Subscribe for more true stories hidden behind history's most glamorous headlines.